Let's dive into one of history's great intellectual mysteries. It's the story of a forgotten genius who secretly shaped Western philosophy for almost 1,000 years, all while his real identity was a complete secret.
Okay, just try to picture this. For centuries, the absolute brightest minds in Christian Europe. We're talking scholars, theologians, philosophers. They're all studying this one book that they think is essential. It's like a core part of their education. But the whole time, they are completely wrong about who wrote it. And I don't mean just a little wrong. I mean they were fundamentally mistaken about who he was, where he came from, and what he believed.
The name they all knew was Avicebron. They figured he was some great Christian, or maybe a Muslim philosopher. But the real author, the one hidden for 700 years, that was Solomon Ibn Gabirol, a brilliant Jewish poet and thinker from 11th century Spain. It's an incredible story of how one man lived two lives long after he was gone.
So you have to be asking, how on earth did this happen, right? How does a Jewish philosopher from Andalusia become a staple of Christian theology without a single person noticing? Well, the whole story revolves around one groundbreaking book. So Ibn Gabirol wrote this profound philosophical work in Arabic called Mekor Hayim, which means source of life. When it got translated into Latin, it was called Fons Vitae, and his name got Latinized to Avicebron. In that process, poof, every single trace of its Jewish origin just vanished. The book's ideas were so universal, digging into the nature of creation, matter, and form, that nobody ever thought to question who the author really was.
And that secret held for over 7 centuries. It wasn't until 1846, right in the middle of the 19th century, that the truth finally came crashing into the history books.
A scholar by the name of Solomon Monk is the one who finally put the pieces together. He proved that the celebrated Avicebron and the Jewish poet Ibn Gabirol were, in fact, the same person. It was an absolute bombshell that forced everyone to rethink centuries of intellectual history. So now that we know about his secret life as a philosopher, who was the actual man behind the name?
Well, behind that towering intellect was a life defined by some really profound and relentless suffering. His personal story, it turns out, is just as compelling as his philosophical one.
His life was tragically short. He probably died before he was even 40. He was born in Malaga, but was orphaned at a young age. He did find some support from a wealthy patron, a man named Yaqutiel ibn Hassan. But when Gabirol was only in his early 20s, his patron was assassinated during some political chaos. This left him to just wander across Spain, always looking for a stability that he would never really find.
And on top of all that emotional turmoil, he was also suffering from a terrible skin disease that caused him chronic, debilitating pain. So he wasn't just writing about suffering in some abstract way. He was living it every single day, and you can really feel that in his work.
But his suffering wasn't the only thing that defined him. Actually, it's kind of funny. During his own time, and for centuries after in the Jewish world, he wasn't known as a philosopher at all. No, he was, first and foremost, a poet of absolutely breathtaking genius.
He was a master of the piyut, which is a type of Hebrew liturgical poem. And these weren't just simple verses. They were really complex, beautiful works of art that were woven into the very fabric of religious life. In fact, his poems are still recited in synagogues today.
This line here is from his masterpiece, Keter Malkhut, or Royal Crown. It's this awe-inspiring philosophical poem all about the cosmos, God, and the human soul. You can just feel the weight of his intellect and his deep spirituality in every single word.
But then there's this. He also wrote these passionate, witty, sometimes even rowdy poems about friendship and nature and wine. Yeah, the very same man who wrote some of the most sublime religious poetry in the Hebrew language also wrote about being so desperate for a drink that he'd become friends with a frog just to have someone to complain with. It just shows you a man of incredible range. He had a soaring spirit and a very earthly soul.
A figure this brilliant, this tragic, and this mysterious. He's bound to attract some stories. And sure enough, over the centuries, the real man slowly started to fade into legend.
One of the most famous tales claims that Ibn Gabirol, this lonely and reclusive figure, actually used his mystical knowledge to create a golem, an artificial woman made out of wood, to be his servant. It's a story that really tells you how people saw his intelligence as something almost supernatural. And then you have the legend of his death. The story goes that he was murdered by a rival poet who was jealous of his talent. This rival then buried his body under a fig tree. But the tree, supposedly nourished by the poet's remains, started producing the most magnificent figs so quickly that it ended up exposing the crime. A very poetic end for a poet's life, don't you think?
So we have the hidden philosopher, the suffering poet, and the mythical figure. But why are we still talking about him 1,000 years after he was born? Why does he still matter so much today?
1,000 years. Just think about that for a second. A full millennium has passed, and his voice is still resonating across cultures, across languages, and across religions. His legacy is just immense. He's one of the fathers of Hebrew poetry's golden age. His hidden identity, Sabran, influenced centuries of Christian and Islamic thought. He's this vital symbol of shared Spanish and Jewish cultural history. And his ancient words are still alive today, inspiring modern artists like the Israeli rock musician Barry Sakharov, who actually turned his poems into a best-selling album.
And that really brings us to our final thought, the incredible story of Solomon Ibn Gabirol, the hidden king of philosophy. It kind of forces us to ask how much of our own history was written by people whose names we'll just never know. How many other secret architects of our world are out there just waiting to be discovered? Thanks for joining me.